This is the Twin City News Around Town. A closer look at the people, places, and events around Batesburg, Leesville, Gilbert, and the Ridge. Presented by the Twin City News, Batesburg, Leesville's community journalism since 1925.
Welcome into this edition of TCN Around Town, the Twin City News podcast. I am Tony Ballman, your editor of the Twin City News, here on this Wednesday. And we are joined today for another of our election 2020 previews by the sheriff of Lexington County, Jay Koon, who has opposition in the Republican primary on Tuesday. Sheriff, I want to give you 2 minutes just to sort of introduce yourself, tell folks why you should remain the sheriff here in Lexington County.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me. You know, we've been 5 years. April 5 was 5 years that I was elected. A lot has went on in those 5 years. I'm very proud of the work we have done. I'm a homegrown Lexington County guy. I've been here all my life. Went to Lexington High School, University of South Carolina, got in law enforcement right out of college over at the town of Lexington. And back in 2015, after a lot of prayer and support from family members, I decided to run for sheriff. And I think back then, if you'll remember, it was a lot of dark days at the Lexington County Sheriff's Office. Probably the lowest point in the history there. A lot of negativity. We had to rebuild that. And it started when Sheriff McCarty was appointed by the Governor Haley at the time. He came in and kind of got back to law enforcement 101, if you will, just kind of back to basics of policing. And he asked me to come over there. And I landed over there in August of 14 and spent about 5 months with him. And when I got elected, I wanted to continue that. We had to rebuild a lot of things. I ran on putting trust back in the office. I ran on fair and consistent enforcement of the law and rebuilding relationships. We had relationships with the community was damaged. Pretty much no relationship with the news media. Federal and state partnerships were strained with our law enforcement agencies. So that was important to hit the ground running to do that from day one. I think we've done that. We put a team in place to get that started and had everything going good. First thing I did, I wanted to look at how we could trim things, how we could put more money into boots on the ground. So we looked at things like our aviation program with our helicopters. We did away with that because Chief Keel sled so they could fully support us. We also looked at how we did our SROs. Back then it was a 50-50 split between the county and the school districts for paying these folks, and now we have upwards of high 30s slots. So that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people to supervise and manage. So we looked at that, and I went to each superintendent. We had meetings, and some county council people sat on it, and we shifted that burden, if you will, to 75% school district and 25% county government. So between the aviation program and the SRO program, we generated over $600,000 that we put right back into boots on the ground for our response to our citizens. So we did that, and everything was going good, and then all the events happened, and we'll certainly get into those, I'm sure, during the interview. But we've been tested and challenged for 5 years with a lot of different events, and I think we've passed all those tests together as a community.
Well, that was one of the questions. You moved ahead to one of the questions I was going to ask you, so we'll jump into it right now. In 2014, when Sheriff Metz was indicted, you did have a task of having to regain trust. Do you feel that you've been successful in regaining the trust of the people of Lexington County?
Absolutely. We have turned Lexington County Sheriff's Department back into a source of pride and an award-winning agency. I was proud in 2017 when our South Carolina Law Enforcement Officers Association awarded us their Agency of the Year. They call it the Award of Excellence. And we received that, and I was most proud for our men and women that it's no fun when there's dark clouds and whispers and negative news stories written every night. They went through hell, and to see them be able to come back and accept that award was a wonderful night for the whole agency. So I think we've hit all those marks. The community is engaged with us. I think my PO staff does a wonderful job keeping our local media informed and our citizens. Our federal and state partnerships with all of federal law enforcement and SLED and Highway Patrol have never been better. So I'm really proud of the progress we've made. And we continue to fight challenges. The growth of this county is still booming, and we have to keep up with that.
Fiscal accountability and fiscal responsibility. I read somewhere that 46% of the county budget goes specifically to law enforcement in this county. do you feel that you have been, and that your department has been, a good steward of taxpayers' money?
Absolutely. We have drilled down, like I described earlier, on how we can reallocate resources. We've done that. Unfortunately, we picked a lot of low-hanging fruit, I like to say. We've scrubbed and scrubbed, and at the end of the day, to keep up with growth, sometimes that requires an increase. You know, we get growth money every year. It's usually about $2 million, but that gets eat up very quickly when you talk about retirement increases on the employer side. That all comes out of that. Most all of our contracts have built-in inflations. That gets whittled away pretty quickly. A couple of years ago, our state email accounts went up, so that comes right off of that growth money. So you only get so much out of that, but sometimes we have to ask for more, and if that's what it takes to keep the community safe, then sometimes we have to do that.
Lexington County is a big county geographically. It has pockets of urban development, particularly among where subdivisions are being built out in the county and that sort of thing. You've got the lake shore up there. Again, you've got a lot of farmland, a lot of rural. How challenging is it for you to ensure that your offices are being the best that they can be for the divergency of population and the geographics and the demographics of Lexington County?
I think that's what makes Lexington County great, because you can come here and take advantage of the best schools in the state, loads of recreation opportunities, a great quality of life, but you can live in a tight-knit community, or you can live on 10 or 15 acres. But like you say, that is very challenging because different areas have different problems. So we have 3 geographical patrol regions in the county, and each one is led by a captain and lieutenant. And I tell those folks, you have to get out in these communities and see what the issues are. I can't sit back in my office and make a cookie-cutter plan, because it won't work everywhere, because Batesburg's problems are not Irmo's problems, and Chapin's problems are not Pillion's problems. So it's different as you move across the county, but it just goes back to getting in those communities, see what the particular issues are, and seeing how we can help correct those.
We'll get into the hot button issue of the day here in just a second, and I think we all know what that is. But you touched on community policing, and that has been a topic that has been talked about very much in the past week or so. How do you have community policing here in Lexington County? Do your deputies live here? Are they a part of the community? And how has that helped with the work of law enforcement in Lexington County?
Yes, relationships are the key to life, is the key to law enforcement. So I think we do have officers that's part of our recruiting pitch. You can work here and live in this community because, number one, our community supports us, and we don't take that for granted, and that is a daily relationship we have to keep fostering. We have resident deputy program that's been around for years, where deputies are responsible for a particular area, and they get in there and know the people, know the local politicians, the local business owners, and how do we do it, because we can't be everywhere. It's a big county, like you say. Nobody knows the community like the people there. They know what's out of place, something that's not quite right. So we tell people, we would much rather you call and it be nothing than not call and we got a bunch of break-ins to deal with the next day. So that relationship is crucial. There's nothing worse than a body in the middle of the street and nobody saw anything. It's hard to solve those kind of crimes. So we rely on that. Another thing we did right after I started, we started a small community action team, because a lot of times our law enforcement are first call, and when we get there, it's not really a law enforcement matter, but they don't know who else to call. A lot of that has to do with time of day, nights, weekends, what have you. Could be something like a elderly lady with a tree in her yard, or a single mom with a plumbing problem. You name it, we get it. So while my men and women are there trying to think outside the box to solve this problem, the police calls are stacking up. So the community action team for the last 5 years been going around building a relationship with all the community groups, churches, civic groups, scout groups, men and women's club. So now when we run across that problem, we can get that local community group to come help it. The problem gets handled, the community group feels good, and more importantly, we get back to police work. Sometimes the thought was send a bunch of deputies there, but I can't really justify them doing community service on the clock when somebody else is waiting for law enforcement matters. We saw after that 2015 flood that our community really wants to respond and help. Sometimes they just don't know how to plug in, so we got to build that bridge.
Well, we are talking at a time when the role of law enforcement in communities, in cities, and the relationships, we talked about relationships with the black community, particularly, that's dominating the headlines. First of all, I just want to give you an opportunity to go on the record of your thoughts of what you saw in Minneapolis last week.
Tony, quite frankly, purposely, I hadn't drilled down on that. I usually never do until the facts come out, because you don't know until the facts come out. Many years ago, after the Virginia Tech shooting, I was able to hear their police chief talk, and that's one thing he stressed, is when something happens, be careful about going on record talking about something, because you wasn't there, you don't know all the facts. It obviously doesn't look good, but I'm all for, if an officer did something wrong, you need to address it and he needs to be accountable. One thing we did back in the winter, and we were finally able to fully implement our body camera program. So that is a tool that aids us tremendously to get the whole picture. You know, if the deputy is right, we want to support him, but if there's an issue, we want to address it. So that was important to us. I met yesterday with Chief Green out of town of Lexington with our local county NAACP leader and a few pastors and a community activist. And it wasn't an introduction because we already knew each other. It was more of, hey, this is where we are. What are y'all hearing? This is what we're hearing. How can we come together and strengthen the relationship? And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of peaceful protests with some outside agitation flare up to what we've seen around the country.
Do you believe that there is systemic racism in the police culture in America, in South Carolina, and I drill down even deeper? Is there systemic racism in Lexington County law enforcement?
I think there's still some of that goes on. I hadn't seen it in our agency in the 5 years I've been there. We monitor that. I can tell you, I came in the door 5 years ago and I wanted our agency to look like our community. I didn't think we focused enough on hiring and promotion of people of color. And I will tell you, or women, men, or people of color, I think we've done a good job of that. We can always improve on that, but it's important that our police force looks like our community so we can relate to all different people.
But is there racism?
I hadn't seen it in our agency. I think as far as policing, I think there's racism in our world as we see it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. There was a case last year, and I don't know if this is still in adjudication. I respect that you can't talk about it in too much, but your department was ordered to pay $200,000 for a wrongful arrest involving a black female suspect. That deputy has since moved on, but was that a racially motivated incident? Was she targeted because she was a black woman?
Absolutely not, because that merchant in that case described the suspect. And so, I mean, we were just responding to a shoplifting, and they gave us the description of the person. So we just responded to what we had.
Based on the information that you had.
Right.
12 in South Carolina, well, in Lexington County specifically, 12% of the population in Lexington County is black. Does that represent about the percentage or the demographic of the department, or I mean, how does that balance? If 12% of the population of Lexington County is black, what percentage of do you know what percentage?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I would think in the last 5 years we've gained ground on that, and we're pretty in line with what the representation are. We're always trying to recruit. We're focusing on historically black colleges. We focus on hitting those spots in our recruiting efforts to get represent all forms of the community in our ranks.
Mm-hmm. 62%, though, in South Carolina statewide, 62% of the arrest, the incarceration rate is among black folks. So do you see that happening in Lexington County? Do you believe that there is a disproportionate number of African Americans arrested in Lexington County based on the 12%?
I don't think so. We look at it, several years ago they passed the law where every time an officer stops somebody, you have to do a written record. It's either got to be a warning or a ticket, and that's all sent to a state database. So we look at those numbers, we look at our arrest numbers, and I don't think it's anything out of line. If we see a spike in something, we certainly drill down on it and see what we can do.
How are you preparing your officers in the future to deal with de-escalation and sensitivity and that type of thing. Is that something that's part of the policing culture in Lexington County?
We have one of the most robust training divisions in the state. People come to model our program all the time. Our block training, our officers get a wide variety of those type incidents, but training on those situations. But I can tell you, just like yesterday, there was a small protest in Red Bank, and what we did is we went and talked to the organizers up front, and we said, hey, what are your intentions? Here's the ground rules, here's the law. You know, you can stand here, but if you get in the street, start impeding traffic, we have a problem. So I think communication is the key. Peaceful protest is fine, but when we have issues, we want to talk about the issue. If it turns into a peaceful protest, we want to talk to the groups on the front end and just lay the ground rules out, and then if we have to come in and take action because they went across them, we know that they chose to do that because they knew where the line in the sand was, if you will.
Countywide, have you seen violence in the last 10 days?
Not anything like we see in other part of the country. Now, I will tell you, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, we were over with the Columbia Police Department, Richland County Sheriff's Office in their jurisdictions. We were also ramped up in West Columbia and around the Harbison area because of some intel we forgot that some of those could have been targets.
Well, you are challenged here in this primary coming up on Tuesday. What differentiates you from your opponent besides the fact that you're the man occupying the office right now?
I think over the last 5 years, Tony, we've been tested. You know, it's easy to just gloss over those 5 years, but let's drill down a little bit. You know, right after we got in office good was the historic floods of 2015. And that wasn't just like you say floods and you think a 1 day or 2 day event. You know, it turned into rescue, and then it was more about securing property. And then, you know, you remember to turn around, don't drown. There were people, because all the water from the upstate came down through the Midlands because it runs downhill over around the Irmo area. There were several neighborhoods that got flooded out that we assisted, and there were tight neighborhoods that had one way in, one way out. So there was weeks of response to that, and I think we passed with flying colors on that. We've had a small plane crash. We've had the largest train wreck in South Carolina since Graniteville. We've had, of course, more recently, the COVID situation. We've had several hurricanes approaching that we have to prepare for. Prepare for. And people say, well, what's the big deal about that? When the governor chooses to reverse those interstates, we have 12 traffic control points that we have to man 24 hours a day until that changes. So it does stress us too. So I feel like we've been challenged as an agency, and with this community, we came through all those challenges with flying colors. And I think that's why you see folks, my colleagues in elected office, other law enforcement people endorse my candidacy, and I feel good about it. And the most important thing people can do is come out on June 9th and vote.
I did a piece last year taking a look at the data that was analyzed by the New York Times on the opioid crisis nationwide, and drilled down here into Lexington County, and I was surprised at the number of opioids that are distributed here by pharmacies, be that legally, be it legally, but then ending up in the hands illegally of other folks. Do you feel like that your department has, and because it hasn't been in the headlines a lot lately, but it's still a problem, do you feel like your department has a handle on the opioid crisis?
Well, I can tell you what we've been doing back several years ago when we see a spike in that. And what happens is usually there's two ways that happens. The traditional gateway drug of marijuana that eventually gets to heroin, but a lot of it is people that have legitimate aches, surgeries, and they get opiates, painkillers, and then they get hooked on them. And at the end of the day, that street value of that pill is somewhere $80, $90. Well, they go get a hit of heroin for 9 or 10. So it's easier, but that heroin's mixed with all kind of stuff, and it ends up ending in tragedies. So we did the key to any problem is enforcement and education. So we did an education component several years ago. DA and FBI did a piece called Chasing the Dragon, and we went around to a lot of churches and showed that to kids and their guardians, and we had a panel there to answer questions after. Somebody from the school district, some of our folks, some people in the substance abuse field, to really say it's a problem. Some of the high schools went as far as you had to watch it in your health classes, and they instituted random drug screens for things like if you want to be an athlete, your name had to go in there. If you want a parking pass for to park at school, your name had to go in that pool. We also started looking at how we can control the medications. Nationally, it's beginning to see a problem. It came from the northwest and northeast. We've seen a big influx through Horry County. So nationally, they're restricting the doctors on the number of pills you can give out. Also, simply getting rid of the pills. When we all started the getting rid of the pill thing, early in my career, it was about water pollution. You didn't want to taint it, so don't flush it. You didn't want to taint the supply of water. Now, more importantly, it's because they don't get into the wrongful hands. You would be amazed at people that say, hey, I had a Christmas party, I had a birthday party, and somebody went in the bathroom and raided the pill box because they're hooked on it. So we have opened up at our office a drop for that. I know CVS's around the Midlands, or 24-hour CVS's, have that pill disposal. I think it's twice a year. The DEA sponsors a big national one. So we're trying to get those pills back off the street. And then probably one of the biggest wins we had several years ago, I made a decision to lead the county, and several municipalities followed, is through a grant, let officers start carrying a Narcan nasal spray. And we've really saved us some lives with that. Unfortunately, sometimes you get repeat saves. Sometimes people will hear, hey, Tony had to get hit with Narcan, we want some of that heroin, it must be super good. So it's in our minds, we can't really comprehend that, but into somebody that has that disease, it's a demon. And I think this is a problem we're not going to rest ourselves out of. We have to work with treatment in places like the Courage Center here in Lexington that we work very closely with to get families that see that and are dealing with that into some kind of support group to get treatment, because it has cut every segment of society, all races, levels of wealth. I mean, it hits everybody, so it's a big problem.
And for the record, I've never had Narcan. So
there you go.
I never had it, and never needed it, thank God. All right, let me let you wrap this thing up. Let me let you speak directly to the voters here in Lexington County. First of all, tell them again why you should remain the sheriff of Lexington County, and in light of what's happening in the world, can you reassure them that police brutality will not be tolerated in Lexington County?
Absolutely. I really would appreciate you going to the polls on June 9th and giving me opportunity to what I've established and done the last 5 years, me and my team. My family and I are stakeholders in this community. We've been here all our lives. My wife is a school teacher of over 20 years, and I've been in this business over 25. So we really are invested in this community like you. We've chose to stay here and raise our families. I would really like your support on June 9th to keep our work going. And secondly, yes, if police brutality is found in this county under my leadership and our agency, it will be addressed and will not be tolerated. We have to be accountable and transparent to all our citizens, and that's what we've been doing.
Sheriff Jay Koon, thank you so very much. Again, you have opposition in the Republican primary on Tuesday, June 9th. But I appreciate you coming here less than a week before the election to have the conversation with us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, that's got to do it for this edition of TCN Around Town, the Twin City News podcast. Watch our video on YouTube of the sheriff. Our entire conversation will be on YouTube, and of course, follow all of our coverage. We have extended an invitation to the sheriff's opponent. Have not heard anything just yet, but we will open up the dialogue to all who are running for office in not just the primary but the general election, because we want to keep you, our audience, involved and informed. That's got to do it for this edition, and as I always say, take care of each other, lift each other up, take care of yourself, but above all else, love somebody today. See you next time.